2 of the 61st Annual MEA Conference. I'm Amanda Froese, and I'll be your host today. I am one of the members of the MEA Executive Committee, and I am proud to bring you this set of speakers brought to you by our sponsors, and look forward to the day. The Odyssey continues. Man, it sure has been a year of learning, with COVID-19 rewriting our work environments and provincial downloading of approvals to change the work that we're doing, a change in the environment, and a change in the consultation requirements that have been going on. This conference is part of the MEA's commitment to bringing relevant information to its members on such changes and providing the opportunities to learn and adapt, making the profession better. I would take this opportunity to thank all of you for coming and listening to these presentations, as well as I'd like to thank Salim for doing such a great job on day one. A special thank you to Amin and Dan, who are running the conference in the background. MEA is fortunate to be supported by such wonderful people. Today we will have presentations throughout the morning and afternoon with a networking break at 1 p.m. This networking break will have a fun game of Kahoot that was well attended and enjoyed by those on Monday, and the top 3 people will get cash prizes digitally. All of our presentations have been saved on the MEA website for your reference after the conference. You can also find the program for today's presentation on that website, and then you can see who is speaking at which times. After each presentation, the speaker will be available to answer your questions, but don't wait till the end. Feel free to ask questions in the Q&A boxes to your right. Anytime throughout the presentation, we'll collect them and ask them at the end. You will also receive a certificate confirming your attendance, and then you can use that for your peak performance or any other continuing education credits that you may need. I want to thank all of our sponsors who made this virtual conference possible. Though we can't meet in person, the trade show is open for virtual meetings during the conference hours, and the static material is available on the conference website 24 hours a day for the entire week. Just click on the exhibitors at the top of the page. Our platinum sponsors are Advanced Drainage Systems, Buildterra, and Concrete Ontario. Gold sponsors are Geranium, Marionville Developments, Tatum Engineering, Tridel, and Walker Construction. Today, I'm happy to welcome to day 2 the platinum sponsor ADS, Advanced Drainage Systems, who is going to give a brief presentation to start the day. With that, I look for ADS to be prepared to come on board and talk to us about their products. Thank you, Cody. If you'd like to share your screen and begin your presentation, we're looking forward to hearing.
Great. Thank you, Amanda. This worked a lot better in the virtual backstage. I'm having a hard time finding where the share session is now.
It should be at the bottom. Do you see a green?
There we go. Okay, it was a different location. Sorry.
No.
I apologize, everyone.
Enjoy, welcome, and thank you again.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Amanda, for the introduction. I'm going to be extremely quick here. I kind of feel like one of those awful YouTube ads that pops up before you're about to watch a video that you really want to watch. So I'll be quick. I appreciate you taking the time out and allowing us to give a little 1-minute spiel here. So ADS, Advanced Drainage Systems, if you don't know who we are, I would encourage you to go to our website. It was recently refreshed. It's really well done, adspipe.com. But in one word, stormwater is what we do. Everything to do with it, from capturing in basins, conveying it through pipe, which is our main market, storage underwater before you can release it, and then finally treating before it's released back to either one of your municipal storm sewers or to the natural water course. We have dozens and dozens, maybe even hundreds of products. So clearly don't even want to try to mention even a fraction of them. But for this group, I think the product that makes the most sense, and the product that I really want to highlight here in 30 seconds, it's called our Sanitite HP. It's a polypropylene pipe, predominantly used for storm sewers, also as a sanitary grade material. The reason I want to mention this is that I believe for this group, whether you're in like a project manager or more senior role, or even an engineer or designer, This is a product or a solution that can help with budgets. Right now, in the storm sewer market especially, the smaller diameters are okay, but in the larger diameters, there's predominantly only a single product that is used, I would say used frequently by some municipalities. And as you can guess, if you have one option for a product, it's probably not the most competitive in terms of pricing and competitors and other options out there. So just by opening up and looking at an alternative solution, there's a lot of opportunity for cost savings and optimization, which especially after this last year of, let's say, an interesting construction season and tendering, could help out a lot. So I don't want to go over this in great detail, but it is a product that's, I don't want to say it's new because it's been around for decades. It's been in North America for a couple of decades. Here in Ontario, it's been around for over 13 years. We have CSA approval, MTO approval. It's been under pretty much every major 400 series highway. And every year we're expanding our municipal approval list. This most recent year, I guess 2020 to start the year, like Guelph, Region of Waterloo, City of Barrie, Innisfil were some of the new ones to, I won't say finally grant approval, but it can be a slow process. So really I just want to put the bug in the ear of those that are potentially in an approval role, those in a leadership role who could maybe mention this to those that could find it interesting. It's an option that myself and my colleague Hayter, we sometimes struggle getting in to speak about it and getting the proper buy-in on this approval. Where really it's not even just an alternative solution to other products out there. It can be superior in many, many aspects. So I'm going to end it there. Like I said, I'll try to be short and sweet. Both myself and my colleague Hayter will be at the banquet on Friday evening. So if you're attending and you want to speak more, that'd be great. We're always happy to speak. Or if you want, you can jot down my email address you see there, cody.neath@adspipe.com. Feel free to reach out anytime and we can discuss whether it's pipe, sanitite, or any other product. So with that, I'll leave you there. Enjoy the day. It looks like a great day. I really want to stick around. I was chatting with David about his presentation, but it looks like a great one. So thank you very much and enjoy the day.
Thank you for that, Cody. I appreciate your presentation. That was great and definitely something to look into. We also greatly appreciate your sponsorship and again encourage everybody to visit the exhibitors in the trade show hub. I did want to mention that tomorrow at 11 a.m. we have the MEA AGM. So those of you that are attendees here, you'll just leave the conference and click on the link for the AGM. Anybody else who is a member will be sent a separate link to join the AGM. For now, our first presenter is David DiPietro. He's a professional engineer and an intermediate municipal engineer and project manager with the City of Guelph. David places value on providing quality engineering services to the public. He understands the social implications of the engineering profession and aims to improve the user experience of infrastructure that he's designed and constructed. Today, he's going to talk to us about Locomotive 616 and its relocation. Thank you and welcome, David.
Thank you very much, Amanda. The locomotive is 6167. And I will share. All right. So hello, everyone. My name is David DiPietro. As Amanda already gave my introduction, I'll just get right into the presentation. Locomotive 6167, relocation in the city of Guelph. Built in 1940, Locomotive 6167 was one of 203 northern locomotives used by Canadian National Railways for passenger and freight service. Number 6167 was based in the Moncton, New Brunswick area, and during the Second World War, it hauled troops and supplies to the eastern ports. It was assembled in Montreal, Quebec. On July 6, 1943, at 3:18 p.m., 6167 was involved in a full-speed head-on collision with locomotive 6166, killing 3 and injuring many others, unfortunately. Damage to 6167 was extensive, but due to the critical wartime shortage of locomotives, it was repaired and continued in service until 1960, when CN replaced all of its steam engines with diesel engines. 6167 was given a new lease on life when CN repurposed the locomotive for special excursion trips. Between 1960 and 64, it carried about 40,000 passengers on popular pleasure trips throughout Ontario, becoming known as Canada's most photographed locomotive. CN presented 6167 to the city of Guelph in 1967 in honor of Canada's centennial. It came in on its rails. It was kind of basically placed on this siding here and then disconnected from the regular track, and that was the last time it was in service on rail. In 2002, Guelph City Council established the Locomotive 6167 Restoration Committee, comprised of railway enthusiasts and city staff. Their mission was to restore 6167 as a stationary display for the citizens of Guelph. So it was placed here on Cardan Street. With the expansion of the Guelph Central GO station, the locomotive was actually relocated from Cardan Street to Farquhar Street in 2010, in what I like to call a lesser known relocation project. It was relocated from Cardan Street on the north side of the Metrolinx tracks of Guelph Central Station to the south side on Farquhar Street. Restoration on the locomotive was completed in 2014, and as you can see, looks a lot different from the other picture, which was taken in 2002. A lot shinier, well painted, and well maintained. It became in 2014 part of the Guelph Museum's collection. The train is 490,000 pounds, about 15.5 feet high, and just under 11 feet wide. In late 2018, the city received notice from Metrolinx that the land where the locomotive was situated would expire in December 15, 2020. So it was placed on land which was leased from Metrolinx, and that lease was set to expire, and that was the reason why we needed to relocate it by the end of 2020. So the primary stakeholders in this project, the Guelph Museums, who owned the locomotive, Metrolinx, who owned the land where the locomotive was situated on Farquhar Street, and then Guelph Junction Railway, which is owned by the city of Guelph, but is a separate entity, and essentially they own the land where now the locomotive would be placed. So the final destination for locomotive 6167 was decided to be John Galt Park. So if you look at this image here, you'll notice the existing location of locomotive 6167 in your bottom left there on Farquhar Street, and the future location, John Galt Park, just across Macdonell Street to the east. And that park was chosen for its final location. John Galt Park was best place to exhibit the locomotive that was decided, and for a number of reasons. So if you look at the area, you'll notice that it's adjacent to the Speed River. It's adjacent to the Guelph Junction Railway. It's close by the Metrolinx rail bridge, which is an aerial rail bridge, which has a lot of historical significance too. And it's a very high traffic intersection, which allows for a lot of exposure to people driving by. Its proximity to the River Run Center and the Sleeman Center, and it's just a great overall location for the locomotive. And it was the only location that was selected, that was thought about, and I think it was a good place to show it. In contrast, the previous location of 6167 was on Farquhar Street. So again, we're now on the south side of Guelph Central Station. We were close to the Guelph Chamber of Commerce, but other than the few residential houses, not really that many people got a good look at the locomotive unless they went down Farquhar Street. Farquhar Street was just a small local road that, ended in a parking lot. People riding the train on the Metrolinx track would be able to see 6167, but it's not really, we wanted something a little bit nicer of an exhibit for the locomotive. Looking at the project stakeholder list, we had internal stakeholders and external stakeholders in this. So obviously the internal stakeholders, the Guelph Museum, Guelph Junction Railway, Guelph Transit, our economic development, our public works group, design and construction, technical services, our traffic engineering group, and our external stakeholders, Metrolinx, Go Transit, Electric Utilities, and of course the Locomotive 6167 volunteers. The Locomotive 6167 volunteers were that group of individuals that were tasked with refurbishing the locomotive as a static display. And they were instrumental from the get-go, and they actually helped us prepare the locomotive before the move by blocking certain moving elements of the locomotive and making it more of a compact piece of equipment to move, making it easier to move rather than pieces shifting and things like that. So they had the most expertise with the locomotive, and they were the only people that really had the knowledge and the know-how on how to package it the best. They also helped with the 2010 move, so that gave them a lot of experience. So this is one of our partnerships with the public that was very advantageous to both sides. And also the locomotive volunteers provided input for the programming of the new location at John Galt Park, what they wanted to see, how they wanted to see it displayed, and how it and they were very happy with the way it turned out. So also just touching on these other internal stakeholders, traffic engineering and public works helped a lot with the detour during move day, the traffic detour, as we had to close the Woolwich and McDonnell intersection. We had to do coordination with our technical services, our inspection services at John Galt Park, as there needed to be construction at John Galt Park to receive the locomotive prior to the move. So we had some detailed design elements. So the site plan design of John Galt Park, we did geotechnical and soils investigation. John Galt Park, like I said, was owned by Guelph Junction Railway, and presumably the soils over so many time, Guelph is an older city, had been contaminated. So we needed to make sure that all the soil that was excavated at John Galt Park was disposed of properly. We did a pre-qualification of heavy lift contractors. We wanted to take care of the locomotive, and we wanted to make sure that the people that moved it had the right skill set and equipment to do such a move. In terms of detailed design, other detailed design elements, the structural design of the reinforced concrete plinth and the retaining wall with railing. We had to do some permitting to the Grand River Conservation Authority, as it is in the Grand River floodplain. They asked us to prove that the locomotive wouldn't float if there was a flood event, which thankfully at 490,000 pounds, it won't. So that's good. And then we also required a Metrolinx work permit because the work was happening on Metrolinx property, and that was obtained by the contractor prior to the move date. This is the construction project team. So the City of Guelph Design and Construction, my department was involved in the tender preparation and the project management. We had our structural consultants, MTE, our geotechnical consultants, HLV2K. Our contractor was Green Space Construction. They were the general contractor, and then they subcontracted Mammoet Canada, which is our heavy lift, our pre-qualified heavy lift contractor, and Stonecast Contracting performed the construction of the plinth and retaining wall at John Galt Park prior to the move. And then, of course, our technical services did our construction survey, our layout, and our inspection. When we went to tender, we didn't specify the route that the locomotive had to take. This was always, in my mind, the preferred route, but we wanted to leave that open to the contractor if they had other ideas. So this total distance is 380 meters. Basically, we're crossing the Metrolinx track to the north side through the bus terminal, down to McDonnell Street, and then into John Galt Park. And this is ultimately the route that was proposed by the contractor as well. This here is a site plan of John Galt Park, and what you're seeing in red is actually the gantry style crane that was proposed by the contractor. This was just like a double check to make sure that everything fit within the site. And as you can see, if you look at the profile and you look at where the gantry is sitting and where the retaining wall is sitting, they overlap. So that was, the retaining wall had to be placed after the locomotive was relocated. So during relocation, there was no retaining wall, and then we relocated the locomotive and then placed the retaining wall after. So this was just a double check. It's a little bit of paranoia, make sure everything fit. It was good. So the gantry setup, November 11th, 2020. So this was a Monday, and they set up at Farquhar Street, the existing location. Our contractor had to get a Metrolinx work permit in order to perform this work. The reason for that was they had to take out one of the fences adjacent to the Metrolinx track in order to fit in the gantry. Mammut Canada Eastern performed this work. They have all their equipment branded. They set up the gantry. So the idea was we were going to load the locomotive, and then the move date was going to be November 14th. So this is prep work ahead of the actual move on November 11th. And in the next slide, you'll see the locomotive actually raised up. It's off the ground, suspended with the gantry, and they're going to drive the Goldhofer hydraulic trailer underneath in order to load the locomotive. So we loaded it up on November 11th, and as work was going on at John Galt Park, preparing the new location. So this is the new reinforced concrete plinth. There was an existing plinth at the old location on Farquhar Street, and we needed to create a new one to exhibit the locomotive. So this was the construction that was happening at the park prior to while the locomotive was being loaded, and before that as well. So it's a concrete reinforced plinth, and as you can see on the picture to your right, there was these railroad ties, which are not made of wood. They're actual resin ties. So they're not going to degrade or anything like that. They're going to last a long time. And those are actually from the original site at Farquhar Street as well. So that was a suggestion from the locomotive volunteers as well, that we reuse those tracks and railroad ties, resin ties, which was a great idea. So after they loaded the locomotive, they transported the ties and rail to the park, placed them in preparation for the locomotive. And as you can see in the picture to your right, also on the left, you'll notice that the steep embankment there where the retaining wall will go in the future. So we had that all set up and ready to go. November 14th move day. And here we are shown, they had a rail stop on the Metrolinx track. They put these special ramps across the tracks in order to transport the locomotive using the Goldhofer, which is this hydraulic trailer. It has lots and lots of axles, and it's basically operated by remote control. So it's very interesting technology. And like I said, Mammut was more than prepared to on how and had the know-how and the expertise on how to move this locomotive. And as it went down through the GO terminal, you'll see in the picture at the bottom left that we're at the intersection of Woolwich and Macdonell. The train was driven backwards because it had to go into the park backwards in order to be placed in a direction which was part of the museum's programming. It wanted to be facing that rail bridge that we'll see here. So here it's on Macdonell Street. You get a nice profile of the locomotive. This is one of my favorite pictures. It was actually parked in this position for a while, maybe an hour or two. So there's lots of time to take lots of pictures of it on Macdonell Street. Behind it, you'll actually see that raised rail bridge, and which is, again, has historical value. So like I said, when they place the locomotive, they have it facing that rail bridge in order to kind of pay homage to the train's train culture and things like that. And actually, you can see people on top of. There's a gentleman on top of the rail bridge taking photos from the top. He's up there in orange. And unloading the locomotive. So a little bit different than when they loaded it. They reset up the gantry crane. They moved all the equipment from Farquhar Street to the John Galt Park, and essentially they set up the locomotive to be unloaded adjacent to the plinth, and then lifted it up and then slid it across and then placed it on the plinth. So as you can see, there was quite a time lapse. They got to John Galt Park probably in the mid-afternoon. They had a little bit of an issue with their equipment, and that's why when they finally placed it, they had to turn on the lights, and it was almost nighttime. But it was a full day event from when they set up the ramps and moved across the track to when they got it down and placed in John Galt Park. But very interesting. And it was and like I said, if you go on the Guelph Museum website, you can watch the time lapse video, and it's all cataloged there. So very interesting work. And yeah. So it's a part of the community, and if you go on Google, that's where everyone's looking at these days. We got good reviews, 4.7 stars out of 5 as a historical landmark. We get a lot of positive feedback from the community, a lot of positive feedback from the volunteers. The locomotive is perched at an elevation that's a little bit higher in order to showcase, the size of the wheels, and it's visible in the park, which I think is great. after you can see in the picture on the right, I think there's a, you can see that railing, that's the retaining wall and railing that was placed after the fact. And it kind of gives the locomotive that feeling of pulling into the station. And we really like that. And a lot of pictures with kids on Google. If you look, this here's my little guy in the left picture on the left. He likes seeing the locomotive. This is the first time he saw it. He heard a lot about it, and he was real excited to see it. So I think that it's a great landmark and a great piece of pride for the city of Guelph. And that's this presentation. Any questions?
Thank you for that presentation, David. As we wait to see if anyone in the audience posts any questions, I would love to hear any lessons learned that you had from this this project. Were there any challenges that you found a solution to in the field, or was everything perfect when you went out for tender?
Nothing's ever perfect. We did run into some issues. We had some utility conflicts at the park, which wasn't related to. It was not related to it was a city-owned utility that we kind of overlooked to some fiber cables, but we were luckily able to accommodate and to relocate that in short time. There was a little bit of a scramble with the staging. We had the downtown dining district in downtown Guelph. So as we had to reroute the transit and the GO trains that day, or the GO buses, I should say, that day, there was a little bit of an issue because the downtown dining district was operational in downtown, meaning that they couldn't use their preferred location for alternate terminal, but we got it resolved. And just a lot of helpfulness from everyone at the city and all our other partners in this project. And I think everyone at the end of the day was really happy with the way it turned out. Another note I'll note is the first day that we loaded the locomotive was November 11th, Remembrance Day. We took a moment to at 11 o'clock to a moment of silence, and we had all the equipment stop and everyone pay homage and respect for Remembrance Day, and it was well received by the community. People had noticed that, and they really thanked us for that too. So it's just an overall great project and great project team.
That's great. Does the city have any plans to use this area for any special festivities, or that downtown business group, or that? Are they latched on to using it for those things as well?
Not so. So currently, John Galt Park the lands are going to be transferred over to the city. Like I said, the property is currently owned by the Guelph Junction Railway. We're going to be transferring it over to the city, and then there is going to be some programming at the park. They're going to spruce it up and to help showcase the locomotive. I don't know if the BIA has any plans for it. That's what you asked me, right? The BIA. But I know that this is close to the downtown. It is close to the downtown. It's Woolwich Street is more of an arterial roadway in Guelph, so it does get a lot more traffic. It's more of a way around downtown, which gives it a lot more visibility. So I think it's a good location.
That's great. I'm going to ask Dan if he's seeing any questions from the audience members.
Yes, we do, but I'd like to ask one myself if I could, David. I enjoyed your presentation. When you made reference to the resin, were you referring to the rails or the railway ties?
The ties.
Okay.
Yeah, the railroad ties. So traditional railroad ties are made of wood. These are resin ties.
That's what I thought you meant, but I wasn't sure. One question has come in, and I'll read it. Does the city have any concerns with vandalism on the locomotive, as it is not in a secured area?
Yes, so that's actually one of my main concerns as well. The locomotive again was in an open area on Farquhar Street. There was little vandalism to it. I do have that concern. However, so we've been fortunate so far, and we just hope that people respect the locomotive and its historical significance. There's really no plan to protect it from anything like that right now. Actually, the back window, which you can't really see well in this photo, but is at the time of the move, the back window where the engineer would sit was a wooden was made of wood, like a wooden plank to cover the window. They're actually going to have a glazer make a piece of glass for that, and that's actually one of the concerns that I have, is that it could be vandalized. But luckily, we've been fortunate so far. It's been in place over a year now.
So no graffiti or anything like that?
Not to date, no.
Okay, just checking here to see if there's any other questions. It appears that there's none. That would be it, Amanda.
Well, that was a great presentation, David. I do appreciate all the work that must have gone into this to move that locomotive, and your efforts to present it to us and show us the locomotive, and what a great project. So in appreciation, we will send you a digital gift certificate just to say thanks, and again, express our appreciation for the presentation.
Thank you very much, Amanda. And I just want to again reiterate that if anyone wants to see the time-lapse video, it's on the Guelph Museum website. Also, more information about the locomotive. And please stop by Guelph, have a look at it, bring your kids, leave us a Google review. Thank you. Thank you for your time, and thanks to everyone for listening.
That's great, David. With that, we are a little ahead of schedule. We have 15 minutes before Paul Knowles is going to talk to us about the Municipal Class E update. So even though it's early, I would suggest that we just take a 5-minute bathroom break, and we will do those throughout the morning as we have time to do so. We'll try to maximize the morning for questions, and when we can, we'll take these little breaks. So please enjoy, and please be back at 9:40 or at 9:39. Thanks very much. Good morning, Paul. How are you?
I'm good. I was muted there, sorry. Hello.
Good morning again and welcome back. Our next presenter is Paul Knowles. Paul is the MEA's MCEA advisor, which is a municipal class EA. He graduated from Queen's University as a civil engineer and worked in the private sector for 9 years before joining the town of Carleton Place as the town engineer in 1989. His involvement with the Municipal Engineers Association and the Municipal Class Environmental Assessment began shortly thereafter. In 1993, Paul was promoted to CAO for Carleton Place, but continued his engineering work and remained very active with the MEA as a board member from 2008 to 2018 and was actually the president in 2017. Throughout the years, Paul has been involved in all aspects of the MCEA document, including all rewrites and amendments. Paul officially retired from Carleton Place at the end of 2018, but is continuing to work with the MEA as the MCEA advisor, delivering training programs and pursuing improvements to the MCEA process. And personally, I have relied on Paul's knowledge many times in my profession to get me through the process. So I want to thank Paul personally for that and turn the presentation over to you, Paul. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. I guess I can't see everybody, but it's a welcome, and hope everybody's well this morning. I'm just going to share my screen and put up a slideshow here. Okay, so as you heard, topic today is the Class EA, and probably most of you have heard me talk on this topic for a number of times over. It seems I'm talking at every conference and I'm getting a little tired of repeating the same stuff over again, but I'll try and give you the latest of where things stand. So today, what we're going to talk about is the amendment. Everybody's really curious about that. So where we stand with the amendment. I'll touch on the new Part 2 order request process. We've had some presentations kind of detailed on that, so I'll just touch about that a little bit. We'll also touch a little on the regulation that is that the ministry is planning that will replace the Class EA. So all this effort we're putting into the Class EA, it's intended to be, I guess, superseded and not used anymore. It'll be we'll follow a new regulation at some point. Then I want to talk a little bit about air quality assessments and their value to the Class EA process. And then we'll just close with the upcoming training opportunities that we're planning. So EA reform, this has been a topic for probably 10 years. The MEA has pursued, really lobbied for this. And the real goals we had were reorganizing the projects in the schedules and dealing with the Part 2 order request process and the significant delays that introduced into the system. So we really made very little progress for a number of years through 2010 on. But in April of 19, the government actually released 2 discussion papers. One was to talk about immediate short-term fixes, and we were pleased with this, and it was going to talk about exempting low-risk projects and timelines for Part 2 orders. So we were excited about this. And then they released a second discussion paper talking more about longer-term modernization of the EA program. So it was nice to see some action on the part of the government. And it followed very quickly with April in June. So in government terms, it was very, very quickly, there was an act, the More Homes, More Choice Act, that actually put into place reducing the number of eligible projects that were subject to a Part 2 order. And this was formally exempting Schedule A and A plus projects. And then it spoke about the Part 2 order request process and how there would be a deadline and limits to the scope. And this was come in the future in the regulation. So we saw some very quick action back in 2019. And the other thing they did in June of 2019 was encourage all of the Class EA holders to submit an amendment that would improve their process. So again, something that MEA was very in favor of. So they asked us in June, put this amendment together and submit it by September of 2019. So MEA did that, and a number of other Class EA holders also submitted amendments. And the ministry's intent was to, I guess, review and approve these amendments as a package. So back in September of 2019, I was thinking, gee, by Christmas we'll have an amended document, and that's very exciting. Of course, that didn't happen. Through the fall, there was very little action. We had some discussion in the winter, so January, February of 2020. And then, of course, COVID came along, and that it certainly interrupted things. So it took until July of 20 to actually post our amendment for comment. So we submitted it in June of 19, and it got posted for comment in July of 20. And again, the government, so there was a flurry of activity in July of 20. They posted our amendment for comment, and the others, all of the amendments. And then they passed the COVID-19 Economic Recovery Act. And this is where they basically completely altered the Part 2 order request process. And it's only eligible for issues that relate to Aboriginal or treaty rights. And they also put in some enabling legislation, excuse me, that would allow for a new regulation that would replace the Class EA. And again, this isn't just targeted at municipal Class EA, it was all Class EAs. So the idea would be there would be new regulations, probably, plural, and it would replace all of the Class EAs. So that happened in July. The comments came in. We had extensive comments from the posting, and MEA responded to those comments in September of 2020. So again, it was somewhat optimistic that by Christmas of 2020, we'd have an amended document. And of course, that didn't happen. So during 2021, there's been revisions to the amendment. So based on the comments, we've had discussions with the ministry, and so, we've altered what we're asking for in the amendment based on the discussions in some instances. And then the ministry undertook or is undertaking Indigenous consultation. And then the other thing we've concluded is there's so many changes that in fact we're not amending the document. The truth is we're going to produce a brand new document. I mean, it is the document with amendments, but the amendments are so extensive, we're really going to call it a new manual. So we've been working at trying to prepare that. So there has been work going on in 2020. It just seems to be taking a long time. So the Indigenous consultation, what has kind of been identified as their major concern is that when we were shifting a number of projects from Schedule B or C into A+, and that creates a bit of a gap because the Indigenous people were relying on the notices that they get under Schedule B or C to ensure that there are no impacts to archaeological resources and burial sites. And so the ministry has come up with a proposal that there would be a screening process, that any of these projects that we've shifted from B or C into A+, would only qualify for the shift to A+ if you went through a screening process that looked at the potential or known archaeological resources and archaeological assessments, and looked at those impacts and mitigations. So they're working on this screening process. So they've floated this idea, and they're seeking input from the Indigenous communities, and that was supposed to come in August 31st. Anyway, so the last information we have is they're still working through that issue. So the new manual, as I said, there's numerous changes. We're just looking at kind of a cleaner format, clean it up a bit. And we want to try and incorporate right into the final version our companion guide, which is our comments that offer advice, and some photos, just make it a nicer document to look at. So just as an example, this is just a little section, happens to be in climate change. You see the blue box. So what we're planning is that the text, the approved Class EA, would be in black, and then the advice that MEA offers would be in a little box and in a different colored font. You can see it here in blue. So there's a little bit of advice, and in some instances, it'd be the advice would be long enough. We couldn't fit it right in. Excuse me. We couldn't fit it right in the body of the document, so there'd be a reference to a document or link to the back. So you see here, air quality is, and then you refer to something, you go there and you get a longer explanation about air quality. So we're trying to build that right into the document as our plan. So what's going on right now? We're keenly waiting on the minister's approval of the amendment. And we understand that what has to happen is the Indigenous consultation has to get completed, and then it has to work somehow into the government timetable to make and announce decisions. So then once we have that, then MEA needs to, we don't know what the final document's going to look like until it's approved. So then we'll have to scramble and get this new manual finalized and incorporate the companion guide into the manual. So that's the status where we sit. The revisions to the amendment, we had significant interest. There was actually 288 comments from municipalities, consultants, stakeholders, Indigenous communities, 147 pages of comments and MEA responses. Many of the comments were supportive. Some were helpful offered helpful suggestions for improvements, and we tried to implement them. There were some concerns, but we feel we've addressed them. So the unresolved concerns. So the part, I guess, on to the next topic here. The Part 2 order request process. And we really should call it unresolved concerns, because we're dropping the whole term. Part 2 order request process is only applicable if it deals with an Aboriginal or treaty right. So instead of bump ups, they were once called the Part 2 orders, they're now known as Section 16 orders. And the ability of the public to request an order is only if it's a protected Aboriginal or treaty right. But there's a separate opportunity for the ministry on their own initiative to consider an MEA project. So this is brand new. So what we need to call this, I guess, is the process to resolve concerns identified after the notice of completion. I don't know if an acronym or a short form for that, but that's really what we have to be concerned about. So just in really general terms, the EA process, you start off with your notice of commencement, you send it out. Then the proponent follows the process, does the technical studies, does consultations, selects a preferred solution. And at the end of the process, you issue a notice of completion and you've got a 30-day review period. And that's been in place for, since the beginning, and has not changed. Now, what's different is what happens after this 30-day period. What was the case is once you finish the 30-day period, if there was no concerns, no appeals identified, no Part 3 orders, then you were free to proceed. And this is what's different. You see the top box there, the proponent issues notice of completion and starts the 30-day period, day 1 to 30. Well, there's this, and I won't go through the details today in the interest of time, but what you need to be very conscious of is day 31 to 60 is other stuff can happen. In day 31 to 60, the ministry can consider the project and either issue a notice that they're going to do something or order that you must do something. That all, you have to wait another 30 days basically. So, and if you hear something from the ministry during those day 31 to 60, it will guide you through this rather fairly complex process. But so you maybe don't need to focus on all of that at the moment. But you need to remember that there's another 30 days after the first 30 days. Now, I guess how we gauge the success, we were always very critical of the former process and the time it took. And the concern is, what happens with projects if we wait 30 more days, and is the ministry going to be issuing lots of notices and delaying projects? And, what's going to happen? So it's been in place for almost a year now. Well, I guess over a year now, but I prepared this chart a few months ago. And so last year there was 177 projects that issued notices of completion. And during the second, from between day 31 and 60, the ministry issued 0 notices or orders. So I guess that's good. So every project had to wait those other 30 days, but in no instances was there a further delay other than waiting 30 days. So of course we'll be monitoring that to make sure that there's only delays if it's something valid, I guess is the point. So anyway, we'd have to say we're pleased with the outcome of that at this time. Now another topic here is the new regulation to replace all of the Class A's, including ours. Now the ministry's goal here is to standardize, because there is significant differences between the Class A's, the various Class A's. They approach things differently. They want to have something more consistent. They also want to develop a project list. And the way it would work, and most other jurisdictions work this way apparently, is that if your project is identified on the list, then it's subject to the regulation. If it's not on the list, it's not subject. And currently the way the Act works is you're subject to the Act. That means you must comply and satisfy the requirements of the EA Act unless you're exempted in some fashion. And you can get exempted by getting on a list. So if we're just taking our Class EA, way it currently works, you're exempted if it's Schedule A or A plus, and you're subject if it's to the Act if it's Schedule B or C. But if if there's a project that we haven't thought of that isn't on the list, it would automatically be subject to captured by the act. And I guess we had that example come up a number of years ago. There was no reference to pathways, no use pathways. And so it's automatically, the act would automatically capture that. So the difference with this approach to the project list is if there's something missing, it's not captured until the ministry puts it on the list. So that's a subtle difference, but it really just takes the, it should be just taking our B and C projects and putting them on a list. And then I guess there would actually not be a list of A or A plus projects, because anything that is not on the list is exempt. Anyway, that's the direction they're heading. Probably not a significant, hopefully not a significant real impact. So I think I actually just explained the site. So you're not on the list, you're not subject. If you're on the list, you're subject. So in theory, this would be all of Schedule B and C projects. The difficulty that we have, though, another thing they've kind of stated is they'd like to see the projects in B and C applied to, doesn't matter who the proponent is, so it would apply to the private sector. And our concerns would be things like roads. I mean, even a municipality builds, we call it driveway, you know, there's pavement, there's curbs in parks or at a waste site or on a private industrial site. People build things that look suspiciously like a road, but they're not treated as a road, a public road under the Class EA. And we don't think it's appropriate that they be treated that way. So I don't think we want to capture those. How are we going to define pumping stations? Again, internal pumps might be inside buildings, or you know, particularly in an industrial complex. All of a sudden, you're going to try and capture the workings of an industrial process with a Class EA process. The other one is applying the idea that a new well is a new water system for an apartment in a rural area, and therefore it's a new water system. So all of the Schedule C requirements would be you know, the responsibility of the developer. That seems like excessive. Shoreline work, you know, it's one thing to have a municipality undertaking shoreline work, but what if it's your one home and it's the projects, the way the list is written, it could capture a private homeowner. Again, bridges on private sites. So we can't just simply take the definitions as written in the B and C and put them in this new project list without having there's high potential for capturing projects that shouldn't be captured. Now, the other thing is the whole process, and I guess we're fortunate might be the word. Anyway, we're unique in that the municipalities already have a portion of our projects that are subject to a regulation, and that's transit. Many of you will have heard of regulation 23108, so from 2008. It's the TPAP process, and it's a regulated process as opposed to the Class EA process. You probably hear people prefer it because of the firm deadlines, and you can see I've boxed the time frames on the side. So again, we've looked at this. The ministry did some consultation back in May, and we've kind of looked at this and sent our thoughts on to the ministry. So you can see the Schedule C process, where we have problem statement and their notice of commencement, and you follow it down till you get the 2 30-day review periods after the notice of completion. And typically that's going to take somewhere less than a year or more than a year, depending on the project. In the TPAT, they've got this regulated 120 days maximum between notice of commencement and notice of completion. So it makes it sound like the process would be significantly shorter. So you go notice of commencement, 120 days, notice of completion, and then the same, interestingly, the TPAP is 30 days for public review and then 35 for the minister's review. I'm not sure why 35 instead of 30. But in reality, the TPAP process, there's all these pre-planning activities. And it's before you issue the notice of commencement, you need to consult with people, evaluate alternatives, prepare your draft, and they call it environmental project report instead of an environmental study report. But you basically do all the work right up to your final conclusion before you issue the notice of commencement. So it's not hard to believe that you can get from notice of commencement to notice of completion if you've already done all the work. And if you've already done all the work, of course, that took time. So I see the names have changed around, but the work remains and the time frame remains relatively the same, I would think. So we suggested that in a new regulation, came up with a new term called notice of initiation, because we like this this regulated time frame to do the final at the end of the process. But seems you should formalize a little bit this pre-planning activity. So have this notice of initiation, and then you do these pre-planning activities, which is the first part of the Class EA, problem statement, inventory, evaluate the alternatives, consult, prepare the draft report. And then it isn't a notice of commencement, it would be a notice of formal consideration or some term like that you'd send out. Consult for this 120 days maximum, then have the notice of completion, and then you're on to the formal 30-day and 30-day review periods. So that's our suggestion. And again, we feel that likely the whole process, other than changing the order and the names and a few things like that, generally speaking, the work is going to remain roughly the same. So anyway, that's our recommendation. We sent that into the ministry, as I said, back in May, and we have not heard back yet anything further. But this is a slide we have about the current process, about how you identify a problem, examine undertakings, etc., and consult throughout. We don't think there's anything really broken about that general approach. It's just tinkering with the details of it. Now, another topic here about air quality impact assessments. I've heard from many municipalities that, I guess, in the very urbanized areas, it's become a fairly standard thing to do to prepare this air quality impact assessment for a road project, and it seems to be creeping out of the densely urban into a little more rural areas, and people have come to MEA, to us, and said, what is this and why are we doing it and why is it necessary? So we had to look at this issue and to see what kind of value that, like, what is this, what is important to consider for air quality and what value does it bring to the process. So we started with some case studies. We thought we'd look at some past examples. This one was in Hamilton, and you can see excerpts from the assessment. Predicted air quality was not considered to be significant when compared to the air quality impacts predicted for future no build scenario. and doubling the heavy trucks didn't. So basically, it concluded there was really, in this instance, there was no significant impact. So there was no, it didn't sway the EA process towards one option versus another because there was no impacts. So it was not a factor in the selection of the preferred solution or the preferred design. It didn't recommend any mitigating measures, and it really just demonstrated there was no significant difference between whatever alternative was selected. So we looked at a second one, and basically we found exactly the same thing. And we looked at the third one, and we found exactly the same thing. So then I kind of sent this into the ministry and said, we're finding that you go to all this effort of preparing this study and it doesn't have any relevance because it's always insignificant. And the ministry sent back 4 examples of what they thought were well done impact studies. So we actually read them, and they say the same thing, that in the 4 they sent, the impact on the overall air quality in the region we expected to be negligible. So there was no no mitigating measures. It didn't contribute anything. And that happened in all 4. So in every case we looked at, I won't bother going through that, the air quality impact assessment consistently found that it was not a factor that contributed to the selection of the preferred solution or the preferred design. It did not contribute or recommend any mitigating measures. And it demonstrated that there was no differences in air quality in the analyzed alternatives. So this is in all examples. So we kind of wonder, MEA just doesn't support allocating time, funds, and effort unless it adds value to the process. So, why go out and do this study if it doesn't add value to the process? So we've proposed a new companion guide section that would, I guess, outline this to people and recommend that they address air quality, not through doing a detailed study, but by referring to the consistent findings of former studies, assuming the projects are similar. So we've asked for MEA, the ministry's input on this, and they have, I guess we started talking about this in August, and I still don't have a response from them. So if anybody had any comments on that, if you found that in your examples, it actually, the air quality assessments you did played a role in the EA process, I guess I'd like to hear about that. Or if you kind of agree and your experience has been the same, I wouldn't mind hearing about that as well, so that we can try and, I guess, get a consistent approach from this. We'd like to have the ministry and ourselves aligned with what proponents should, the expectations for proponents. So we proposed this new section of the guide that I won't bother going through. So that kind of gets us to where we are now and what we see coming ahead. We certainly hope the amendment will be approved before there's an election. And I realize our dates are, the date for that approval is either approaching quickly or is going to get caught up in the election process, and it won't happen for a long time. So I guess we'll see what happens there. But whenever it does happen, we're looking at launching training webinars. So what we're picturing is there would be a webinar that would talk. The big changes are to the schedules in Appendix 1. So we'd have an afternoon session that focused on roads, another one that focused on water, wastewater, another that focused on transit. And then we'd have one that focused on part A of the document, so the whole process, This would include the park to order process that we've already talked about, but all of the changes to the process. Then there's a couple of specialized ones that we've already talked about, the new Heritage Bridge checklist back in 2020, but we would likely redo that again. With the shifting of projects into A plus, again, we earlier have done a session on consultation expectations, but we'd likely redo that. And then one of the kind of significant or more complex changes we're proposing in the amendment is the approval of wastewater and road facilities via the Planning Act. And what I mean, particularly collector and arterial roads. Right now it's restricted to local roads only. And there's some complex conditions you have to comply with to make it eligible for Planning Act approval. And I think we want to dive into that with some examples. So there'd be a separate presentation on that again for an afternoon. So we're looking at organizing those, I guess, as soon as possible after we have an approved amendment, because obviously until the amendment's approved, we can't do that. So watch for those things coming up. And any questions?
Thank you very much for your presentation, Paul. And I know we'll all be looking forward to those webinars and seeing this come through. We've in my work, I've definitely seen the changes in the MECPs asking questions during the 30-day appeal period. I do know that there are some questions from the floor, so I'm going to turn it over to Dan to ask those questions.
Hi, Paul. Thanks for your presentation. And as always, thank you for all the work you do for the MEA. We don't know where we'd be without you. Got a couple of questions from the floor. From Christine Adams at the City of St. Catharines. MECP has been requesting to review the consultant's draft project study reports before they say we can file a notice of completion. Has this step been agreed to by the MEA? Consultants reporting this typically takes 30 days for uncomplicated projects.
Yeah, hi, Christine. That's a question we've had, and that there's no consistent answer, I guess. Some regional EA coordinators seem to expect it in all projects. Some only ask certain times. Some municipalities, some proponents make it a habit of doing this, of submitting them and build it into their schedule. Others don't. The ministry feels they have the right to ask for it, but we, I guess, don't. That's not. We don't think that's a clear step that they do have, and if you just publish a notice of completion without waiting for their review, we think that would still comply with the MEA process. So basically, I don't have a good answer. There's differing opinions about that. Maybe that's something that if we actually move to this new regulation will be much clearer, and that issue won't disappear.
Okay, Paul, we have another question I would like to ask you. This will be the last question. If any more come in, we'll deal with those offline. This is from Bill Garibaldi of MTE Consultants. Based on your slide 177, sorry, I'll read that again. Based on your slides, 177 projects had an extra 30 days delay added to them. That is a cumulative 20 years of delay based on a 5-day working week. Why does the MECP need to take this blunt approach? Is there a way to reduce this impact?
Well, I guess it's I suppose a trade-off. Yes, when you think about it, previously there was out of the 177, I'm just going to guess here, we saw as a rule, maybe 20 or 25 Part 2 order requests. And those Part 2 order, one thing we did find for certain is that those 25 Part 2 order requests that would come in would all get denied. There's only in the whole history of the Class EA process, I believe there's only been two times that the ministry has actually ordered a proponent to undertake a higher process. So in all cases, they've been denied, but it took, sometimes it might have taken 6 months, but often it took 2 years. So I think what we're comparing is, do we hold up 177 projects for 30 days, or do we hold up 25 projects for 6 months to 2 years? So I think that's the comparison. And yeah, this system that the ministry has put in place was not discussed in advance with MEA. It isn't something we recommend. So, and I guess we're still, the ministry just simply announced it and said this is the way it is. So is it an improvement? At least, so those 25 projects that would have been held up for anywhere up to 2 years, we'll think it's a great improvement to only be held up for 30 days. I don't know what else I can say on that.
Well, thank you for, sorry, Dan. Thank you for imparting your wisdom and your knowledge and all the work you've done on this, Paul. As a token of our appreciation, we will be sending you a gift certificate. So thanks again for taking the time to speak to us today.
Thanks, Amanda. Goodbye to everybody.
Take care. Our next presenter is MEA. He is a civil engineer registered with PEO who earned his Bachelor of Science in Engineering from Oklahoma State University. Through his work in the oil industry, MEA was able to build on his technical knowledge of cementing materials, field operations, and soil mechanics. His experience as a regional engineer with an international development organization allowed him to shape his engineering problem-solving and management skills. After many years overseas, Amin decided to jump into the infrastructure and industry in Canada. He earned his master's degree from the University of Manitoba, where his research was used in reviewing and updating the specifications of base and sub-base granular materials. This makes Amin the perfect person to represent MEA on the OPS committee, and he is going to speak to us about the OPS general conditions of contract and what's coming. So I'll give it to you, Amin.
All right, thank you so much, Amanda. Thanks for the nice introduction. I'll go ahead and share my screen. All right, I'll be quite brief. Today I'm going to be talking about the Ontario provincial standards and specifically the general conditions of contract. So this is parallel to what Arup Mukherjee's presentation presented yesterday. So I'll be very brief on that. What is OPS? I hope, and I'm sure, but I hope everyone on this conference knows what it is, but I'll just provide more info on it. It's a set of standards with multiple volumes that contains standard specifications and standard drawings for Ontario, specific for Ontario's public works. It's based on good practice and lessons learned, and it's updated regularly, reviewed for safety, durability, and constructability. The specifications outline how the work should be done, construction materials, properties, measurements, and basis of payment. The drawings show you typical layout of various components such as dimensions, rebar spacing, filling depths, and what type of material should be used in each location as well. And like Arup mentioned yesterday, it's we're the custodian with Ontario Ministry of Transportation. We're the main custodian of the Ontario provincial standards, but we also, with involvement and support from many other organizations representing contractors, consulting engineers, and manufacturers and their associations. it has been the OPS has been in use for quite a while, and the standardization that provided by OPS can really limit unnecessary variety of products and components, and also simplifies production procedures, and can harmonize training programs as well, and really facilitates the transfer of knowledge and staff and experience around municipalities and agencies that use it. It is now characterized by consistently well-built and cost-effective, safe and dependable highways and roads in the province. So it's definitely stood the test of time. The OPS organization structure is, there's an advisory board of directors that has representations from, like I mentioned, different stakeholders. And then there's a standard management committee and OPS staff that looks after coordinating the duties of each specialty committees. And then you have the specialty committees that look at the specific segments of the standards and drawings. So why would you use OPS? Like I mentioned, consistent and cost-effective to owners and to contractors. So it's money saved for everyone. It maximizes the return on infrastructure investment, reduces contract preparation time because all of the specifications are already taken care of for you. Products can be sold to a broader area because they're going to be consistent in meeting only one harmonized specifications instead of multiple different ones. It's clear and concise, ease of communication and interpretation, facilitates the share of knowledge, like I mentioned, and experience through harmonization and consistency of training courses or training programs across the province. It's also, like I mentioned, updated regularly by practitioners and experts. So you can depend that it's always meeting the current state of the practice. Standards have been time tested and have a great track record. All right, so for the general conditions of contract, the last update for that specification was in 2019 to reflect the new updates on the Construction Act. I'm sure you're all familiar with the new updates, but just for the sake of it, we'll go through them briefly, and we'll talk about the next what to expect in the next update process. So the first thing was updated was the introduction of the prompt payment or the prompt payment through a proper invoice. So prior to the 2019 update, payment usually was done through a payment certificate issued by the owner. Now the process is different. It's a proper invoice submitted from the contractor to the owner, and that starts the time. The payment request is initiated upon the owner's receipt of the invoice. The owner has 28 days to make the payment. The owner disputes payment, and if the owner disputes the payment, they have 14 days to provide a notice of non-payment. According to the Construction Act, the proper invoice can be a written bill or other request for payment for services or materials and submitted monthly unless stated otherwise in the contract. So that's pretty broad in general, and that's where the general conditions or OPS MEA 100 comes in handy. So according to this specification, it requires the following for a proper invoice: quantities of work permitted, value of work performed, any advanced payments for materials, the amount of statutory holdback, the amount of any acceptable taxes, the amount due to the contractor, and then if your municipality has other things that is more specific to them, any information that may be prescribed in the contract document. And it's also any requirements set out in Section 6 of the Construction Act. So here's the timeline of how payments would look like by the submission of a proper invoice by the contractor. That starts the clock. And from then you have 28 days for the owner to pay the invoice, pay the contractor. And from that, there's 7 days for the main contractor to pay their subcontractors. And from there, there's 7 days for the subcontractor to pay their subcontractors until everyone is paid. If the owner does not agree with the invoice, which does happen, but not often, they have 14 days, and before there's a deadline for the owner to provide a notice of non-payment, or if that means they wish to dispute the invoice. That can happen. Like I said, it's not recommended. We like it when everyone gets paid and they're happy, hence the smiley face. If it goes to claims or disputes, it can take time. It can cost everyone time, and also construction delays as well. So according to the survey that we're doing, which I'm going to talk about more in the coming slides, out of many projects that responded, quite a few that responded that said, I think only 3 responded saying that they have claims and disputes due to the proper invoice. So that's promising. That's good to see. So let's talk about what are the updates or the changes that on the claims and disputes. So claim submission and all of the claim negotiation is similar as the 2006 update. Negotiation is similar as well. This dispute resolution, mediation is going to be the same. Arbitration, same as before. The only thing that was added is adjudication, which can be enacted at any time, but either party during the claim process. So when there's a claim, you can go to mediation or arbitration, and now you can also go to adjudication. And also, according to our survey, the parties or the agencies responded, said that up to now from the 2020-2021 construction season, they didn't have any project go to adjudication, which is also a good sign, because that could be costly as well. But when you need it, it's definitely there, and it's there for a reason. In some cases, you will need it. The interest rate to be calculated, it would be based on the prejudgment interest rate determined under the subsection 127(2) of the Courts of Justice Act. You can access the website, and that's just the interest rate. So if you need to determine an interest rate based on the Muni 1 OPS Muni 100, you have to use this interest rate, just so that everyone is on the same page when there's a claim and non-payment, and there's a discussion on interest rate. So the next update is due to 2024, but the General Conditions Committee is working on it from now, just to be prepared. So we're meeting once a year, and up until 2023, where we're going to be meeting more often than that to finish the update. Right now and I would also like to acknowledge the members of the committee who represent different agencies and organizations. So right now we're on in our task list is launching the survey. This should be really here. So we've launched the survey. We've collected some responses, but we're going to keep it open until March or later in 2020. So if you're on the call, I'll direct you to where you can find the survey and complete it. It'll provide us with your feedback on the 2020-2021 construction season and how the OPS Muni 100 either helped you or what is good about it, what's not working for you about it, so that we can make it better and update it. And then we're gonna prepare for a jurisdictional scan, and we're gonna launch the jurisdiction scan, and that will get us prepared to review and update the standard specification. So your feedback on the November 2019 version of the Muni 100 during the 2020-21 construction season, it will be instrumental in this committee's 2024 update. If I can just get you to log into or go to the Municipal Engineers Association's website, go to resources, and under OPS, you'll find directions to take the survey. And while you're there, you'll be able to find other resources regarding OPS if you would like to volunteer to be a representative on one of the vacant positions at any of the specialty committees, the OPS specialty committees. If there's requests for comments, you'll be able to find it there. So resources, OPS, anything related to OPS that you want to contribute to, you'll find it here. And finally, I would also like to thank everyone on the OPS 101 course development committee that was very instrumental in getting the new staff at municipalities and consultants as well, and also some contractors up to speed on how to use OPS and why is it important, so that we can really achieve a harmonized set of standards across Ontario and make use of this free of charge service based on really on just volunteer works and support from organizations and associations like the MEA. With that, I'd like to thank you and open the floor for questions.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Amin. As I wait to see if there's any questions coming from the floor, I would just ask if you could tell me what positions are available for volunteering, and maybe we can pique some interest of those that are watching to come. Do you know the specialty committees that are looking for help right now?
I think the OPS Traffic Safety Committee is looking for a volunteer, and if I can get Dan to help me in the background. Am I forgetting any other committees? Yeah, I think so far that's the only one. But if they go on the website, we update it regularly. They'll be able to see which committees are looking for volunteers. And if there's no committees that are looking for volunteer, just feel free to submit an application and choose the committee that you'd like to volunteer for. As soon as we have an opening, we'll contact you right away.
That's great. I do also note that that website has lots of useful information, and it's asking for comments for some of the other specialty groups. So I encourage every viewer to take a look at the resources page and see what the OPS groups are up to. Dan, are there any questions from the floor?
Not yet, but I do wish to confirm Amin's comment. The one vacancy that currently has come up is within the OPS Traffic Safety Committee. Other than that, we're full. That's
great. So the OPS Traffic Safety Committee is looking for a volunteer. So appreciate anyone looking to do that. At this time, I recommend another one of our 5-minute breaks just to get us in between Amin's presentation and the next presentation. So we will be back here by 10:45, ready to listen to a presentation on the MEA and ACEC contract. So we'll see you then.
Hi, Amanda.
Good morning and welcome back, everybody.
Oh,
Our next
oh, hi.
presentation is going to be Catherine Morrison. Catherine is the Issues and Stakeholders Relations Specialist with ACEC Ontario. She is responsible for providing support on strategic advocacy initiatives and conducting policy-based research. Catherine manages ACEC Ontario Rapid Response Program and advocates for the business interests of ACEC Ontario member companies and the value of the engineering work that they do. Catherine works closely with MEA on joint initiatives, including the MEA ACEC Ontario Standard Agreement, and is currently working with a team to update this agreement to increase its efficacy and to broaden the use of the agreement. With that, I'll turn the presentation over to you, Catherine, and ask you to share your screen. Thank you very much for coming. Sorry, you were on mute, Catherine.
Oh, there we go. So good morning, everyone. So as Amanda said, my name is Catherine Morrison, and I'm the Stakeholder Relations and Issues Specialist with ACEC Ontario. Today, I'll be going over the MEA ACEC Ontario Standard Agreement. From here on out, I will be referring to it as the Standard Agreement because it is a little bit of a mouthful. So we're going to be going over some exciting new updates to the agreement. So to start, what is the Standard Agreement? So the Standard Agreement aims to maintain sound and equitable terms and conditions for consultants and their clients. Rooted in mutually equitable and consistent terms and conditions, the agreement developed between ACEC Ontario and MEA balances the needs of the client while allowing consultants to complete their work according to industry best practices. So some key highlights of the agreement. So the agreement has a fillable field standardized form that allows consultants and municipal clients to flexibly tailor their agreements to meet insurance and legal requirements and project specificity. It's fair, reasonable, and has reciprocal terms and conditions that seek to appropriately balance risk and responsibility. And it's also up to date and in compliance with the Construction Act. So before we take a look at some of the new updates to the agreement, we just wanted to go over the history of the agreement and the joint effort and collaboration from both MEA and ACEC Ontario to bring the agreement up to date. So starting in 1989, the agreement was initially called the Client Consultant Agreement for Municipal Works. So ACEC Ontario, formerly known as CEO, many of you may still know us as CEO, and MEA jointly developed the agreement. Back then, it was in the form of a memorandum of agreement, and it contained general conditions and information, fees and disbursements, and services information. The agreement didn't see an update for many years until 2002, where the introduction of a consultant appraisal form was introduced. So this form was quite prescriptive. It had the overall success of a project form, quality of services performed on the project form, corporate practices for a successful project form as well. So these forms were quite prescriptive, a little bit rigid. So you will see in the following years that those forms did get dropped. So moving on to 2006, really minor changes to the general conditions and fees. We didn't really see any update or any large update to the agreement until about 10 years later in 2016. This is when the agreement got updated and it looks more like what you would see the agreement now to be. So in 2016, it was renamed the Client Engineer Agreement for Professional Consulting Services. So it was reformatted into a contract form away from that memorandum of agreement. And also in this time, the term engineer replaces the term consultant with the agreement. And then following 2015, between 2017 and 2018, we introduced a fillable field PDF format. So that allowed for some more flexibility, allowed it to be more tailored to specific projects. There was also a copyright disclaimer that was included. That was to help with some version control. And also there was a user guide that was developed for ease of use. The user guide takes the user through the agreement and it really pulls out specific areas that the user needs to be paying attention to when filling out the agreement, whether they be the consulting engineer or the client. So in 2019, the agreement was further updated to reflect the Construction Act. So the agreement is actually fully Construction Act compliant. So since October 2019, it has been in compliance. Also a notable update in 2019 was the dispute resolution clause. So the dispute resolution clause from the agreement versions before was quite simple, and it really became expanded in 2019. And finally, on to 2021, the agreement is actually currently being updated and reviewed by both MEA and ACEC Ontario. So what's next for 2022 for this agreement? So ACEC Ontario and MEA, with the legal support of Macmillan LLP, have been working to update the standard agreement to reflect the rapidly changing insurance and legal requirements and industry standards for both the consulting engineer and the client. MEA and ACEC Ontario mutually recognize the need to and the benefit of updating the standard agreement. The goal of this update is to broaden the use of the agreement while retaining the original spirit and intent of the agreement as well. So here are some key features of the update. So it's going to have some expanded terms and conditions to minimize additional legal review. That might sound a little counterintuitive at first, but the hope is that, with more general terms and conditions, there will be some more clarity for both parties involved, which will minimize any legal intervention. There's also updated language to reflect municipal and consulting practices that have changed since our last update. There's also clear consultant, client, owner responsibilities. So these have been a little bit more prescribed in the contract of, who's responsible for what and how that fits within the contract. There's also additional sections which will allow for broader use of the agreement. For example, there's payment certification and construction administration terms and conditions in there. If the project doesn't require those, they simply do not apply to the agreement, but this will allow for a broader spectrum of projects to be used with the MEA ACEC Ontario Standard Agreement. And finally, we will be updating the user guide to reflect these changes when they become final. And the newest version of this agreement will be available in early 2022. So stay tuned for that. The current agreement can be found on both of our websites. So it is on ACEC Ontario's website. To access it from ACEC Ontario's website, you have to be a member firm with a unique login ID. However, if you are not an ACEC Ontario member, it can be found on MEA's website following this path below. So if you are interested in seeing the current version of the agreement, this is where you can find it. This is where it will also live once the agreement has been finalized and updated. So that concludes my very brief presentation on these updates. So if anyone does have any questions, please feel free to ask.
Thank you for your presentation, Catherine. I know Bruce and I did a presentation earlier in the year about the contract and the advantages of using it. So I, at a small municipality, do use it so that we don't need to go to the legal all the time and rewrite contracts, and do find it useful. I enjoy the strikeout features and those things. I also know that the survey was done. Did you find that there were many responses, and what did you hear as to what's good about the existing contract and what did people want to keep?
So, something that was a recurring theme in that survey was, a lot of people really liked the simplicity of it. So what we've done with this agreement update is, while it might be a little bit more expanded, it still is very simple and straightforward. It just breaks out more areas that can help to broaden the use of it. So as I mentioned before, having those payment certification sections will allow for a broader use, but it doesn't take away from the simplicity and the straightforward nature of the agreement. So that was one theme that we saw a lot in that survey. We also, had quite a diverse pool of respondents in the survey. So it was very great to see that we had, from very small municipalities to very large municipalities who do use the agreement. So we are really looking forward to broadening the use of this and seeing if these updates can help to make this an agreement that can be used no matter the size of the municipality.
Thank you for that. Dan, are there any questions on the contract from the floor?
Yes, also like to say hi to Catherine. Hi, Catherine.
Hi, Dan.
We have one. I don't know if there's a typo. There was an autocorrect but I'll read it as it's written. It says, when are proper invoices applicable to consultant assignments? Unless they meant paper invoices, but I'm reading it as, when are proper invoices applicable to consultant assignments?
So if it's proper invoice in terms of the Construction Act and prompt payment, I would have to go take a second look at that, but I'd be happy to get back to you on that. And if it's a paper invoice, if that's the actual typo there, I can also look into that as well.
And since we have a bit of time, maybe I could ask. I don't have the person didn't identify him or herself that asked that question, but just reaching out to you, if you can just confirm if you meant paper or proper. We will wait for you. We'll give you a half a minute, please. Bear with us, Catherine.
Absolutely.
Are there any other key points that you'd like to highlight in the agreement, Catherine, that could be benefit to the municipal engineers, and why you think they should be using this form of agreement?
So, doing this work that we've been working with McMillan LLP, one thing that has been, and you know this, Amanda, one thing that's been very important to us is making sure that this is balanced. We don't want to favor the engineer or the client in any way. It's very fair. It's very reasonable. So, we've even taken a look at past language that has been used, and we have revised that as well, so that it's really as close to as a 50-50 split in the agreement in terms of the language. So you're not going to be seeing language that really leans one way to one party. And it might look a little bit different than what some people have in their current contracts right now, but the positive point of all of this is that it really does allow for both parties to come to that reciprocal middle ground that allows for these agreements to be a little bit more streamlined. There's less back and forth if it's these accepted terms and conditions that are in this contract. So that's one really great feature of it, is that, even from years past, it has been updated to really make sure that fair and reasonable language is the prevailing method that we've been using to update it. And also one great feature of it is that it still has supplemental terms and conditions. So if there is, some language that needs to be altered, even the slightest bit, even by one word or one term, that still is a feature that we encourage clients to use with the standard agreement. So it allows for a little bit more flexibility, and it allows for a little bit more customization, because everyone's different. Every municipality is different. So that's one feature that we still like to promote with the standard agreement, that it can be used and it can be customized in virtually just about any section.
Hey, Catherine. Bruce, someone we both know, Bruce Matthews, has written in saying that he believes the individual met proper in the context of the Construction Act. The timing of invoicing should be defined in the contract based on regular frequencies or milestones. So we'll leave it at that.
Yes.
Got another question, a comment and a question from Evan Cassidy. Sorry, Evan, I'm not recognizing where you're from. I apologize for that. But Evan is saying, thank you for the presentation. We have used the agreement in our assignments with consultants. Are there any concerns, risks with not using this agreement?
So risks of not using this agreement, I would say, it can take a little bit longer to then negotiate some of that contract language with your proponents. The great thing about the standard agreement is that it's been agreed upon between both associations, so it does meet the industry standard. So I would say that that's a really big benefit of using it. In terms of any specific risk of not using it, I wouldn't say there's a high risk threshold of not using the agreement. However, I think that there's a lot to gain by using this agreement. And I think that also having the Construction Act compliance and also having the terms include a dispute resolution clause. That's something from our end that we don't see very often in the market. So it really is that full package document that I think that if you do continue to use it, and I really hope you do continue to use it, that it's really that streamlined end-to-end document, and you don't have to put as much effort in the behind the scenes work of negotiating terms and conditions.
Okay, we have another question. This person has not identified him or herself. Question or the comment is, I believe that larger municipalities may revert to their in-house agreements due to many supplemental conditions being added. What is ACEC's thoughts on this? I would say on behalf of the MEA that we worked together with ACEC to develop this agreement. Initially, the context was to develop a standard agreement for those municipalities that needed a form of agreement. The MEA is totally fine with a municipality using its own agreement, especially those larger municipalities that have large legal departments and have the support of those professionals to develop their own agreements. So it's not a concern of the MEA if you don't use it, but if you don't have a standard form, this is a great one to use.
Yep.
Catherine, your additional comments?
Yeah, well said, Dan. So I would have to agree with everything Dan said there. Again, going back to the fact that this agreement does have that section for supplemental terms and conditions, it can be used to customize the agreement. So, you know, if there is a larger municipality that may have that more robust legal department that does have more requirements for your contracts, we would still recommend using this because it does, again, have the industry standard language. So if there are certain things that need to be included, again, that supplemental terms and conditions section of the contract is where you would do that. So I would recommend using this agreement, and it will cause, or it will allow for, you know, less negotiation and, you know, more people streamlining their contracts and getting the work started. So I would say that that's the huge benefit of this, is that it does streamline that. And again, if there are customizations that need to be made, supplemental terms and conditions can be used for that.
Great. Thank you, Catherine. Amanda, there are no further questions. We're a little ahead of schedule. We do have the next speaker ready. I'll leave it up to you if you want to take another short break or if you want to move forward.
Thank you for that, Dan. I just wanted to note to Catherine too, in my day job, what we get asked with consultants a lot is the insurance requirements. So many municipalities are asking for the 5 million, and lots of times we get consultants asking for the 2 million level. So I know that that's something that we're looking at as the subcommittee and recommendations for that as well. But if you could just tell people again one last time where they can go to have some input on what they would like to see in the agreement, then that would be appreciated.
So sorry, can you just repeat that last part?
Sure. Is there any way that any of our members can provide feedback on what they would like to see or what issues they have with the agreement? If not, we can do it through a link on the MEA website to my email address, and I can bring it back to the committee. But if there's a general email address, then that can be done.
Yes, so that would be very helpful. So you could email myself. So my email address is on ACEC Ontario's website. For anyone who has pen and paper on hand and is very keen, my email address is cmorrison@acecontario.ca. So you could email any recommendations to myself or to Amanda. At this time, the agreement is well underway in its update. So if there are any recommendations or any sticking points that you may have, please email those sooner than later, and we will see what we can do in regards to the agreement update.
Thanks for that. And sometimes those comments just make us know that we're on the right path too,
Yes,
right? So that's
exactly.
very much appreciated.
Sorry to jump in, only because we're ahead of schedule. Another question has come in, so I'm thinking maybe we can just ask it of Catherine.
Sure.
Use this time. It's from Kyle Vandermeer. Again, my apologies, Kyle. I can't clue into where you're from, but thanks for asking the question. And Catherine, he asks, how does the standard agreement compare to a CCDC contract from a high level view?
I'm very glad that you asked that, because as we updated this agreement, we wanted to, take a look around the market and see how other standardized forms are doing. So CCDC 31, we did decide to model some of the updates based on what CCDC has done with their 31. So in comparison, is it the exact same? No, it's not. But we certainly, there were some sections of it that we found would be strengths for both the consultant and the client. So I would say in terms of sophistication, it's definitely on that level of CCDC 31. And we've, taken those efforts to modernize the agreement to have that level of sophistication, but at the same time, keeping that streamlined simplicity of the original standard agreement, just so we don't lose the spirit of the original intent of the document.
No further questions.
All right. Thank you very much for your time, and we will have a gift certificate sent to you as a token of our
Thank you.
appreciation for the speech. Thanks very much,
Thank
Catherine.
you very much. Okay, have a good day, everyone.
You too. With that, our next presentation is going to be from Sam Sidawi, and he is the Director of Enterprise Asset Management for the region of Peel and the Chair of the Board of Directors for Asset Management Ontario. Sam is an experienced asset manager and a professional engineer who has participated on several committees, including OMBI, Ontario Public Works Association, and the National Research Council. Currently, he is a member of the ISO 55000 MEA committee and was a member of the expert panel that assisted the province in the development of OREG 58817. I also would love to mention that Sam has been a speaker for the MEA before, and I'm sure he will again. He is joined by Chris Chen, who is the Executive Director of Asset Management Ontario. He served previously as a municipal treasurer and deputy treasurer and also spent 12 years in the Ontario government with the province. Chris helped to develop the asset management planning regulation for municipal infrastructure. He serves on the technical working group of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities Municipal Asset Management Program, as a member of MFOA's Accounting and Financial Reporting Committee, and on the Climate Risk Institute's ROIT Steering Committee. So with that, I would like to turn the presentation over to them.
Hi, so my name's Nick. I heard Sam and Chris introduce. I just joined a little bit late. Just want to make sure I'm on the right time, Amanda. Yeah, everything's good?
Yes, and I'm sorry, that's what I have on mine. Asset management with Aqua is what I see up there, but
Yeah,
you're
so I'm asset
right.
management at Aqua. So I'll share my screen and I'll start. And you want to
All
I'll give my
right.
own bio?
I would love if you could do that for me. Thanks so much,
Sure.
and sorry for the misunderstanding there, Nick.
All right, all good, all good. So thanks everyone. Let me just go on slideshow mode here. Thanks, Amanda. So my name's Nick. I'm in the asset management world. And so I guess we got our wires crossed. So I've had for the past 15 years, been in the area of asset management. I spent 13 years in private consulting, and last year took a position with the Ontario Clean Water Agency. And really to bring about a new approach to doing asset management. And what I can say is if you're part of sort of the asset management establishment like I am, then you might be a bit offended by some of the things I have to say today. So I'll just start with that. And if you're not, if you're, I would say, a different kind of engineer, so I'm a municipal or civil engineer by training. I think you might have said, I kind of thought we were trying to do that asset management thing a little bit incorrectly the whole time. And maybe you'll see some of the ways we're looking at doing it now really evolving beyond what we've done as the way to move forward. So with that, thanks everyone for joining, and I'll get going with the talk. If you've had a chance to read the abstract, Really, my entire career has been the struggle between what are we really trying to do when we talk about asset management, and then this, concept of turning it from into a verb of like, what are we doing? What is asset management planning? And really sort of scratching our head around, what are we doing here, basically. And so to start, I always think about why do we do what we call infrastructure asset management or asset management. And I look at it in two simple things. We're trying to forecast, so that's always an asset management. How much do we need to spend in order to have infrastructure meet our objectives? And so the term in ISO 55000, which is the asset management standard, asset performance is defined as the ability of an asset to fulfill its objectives or requirements, or whether it's fit for purpose. So is it fulfilling our goals as society? And so that's what we're really trying to do, is to say, how much should we be spending on infrastructure for it to meet our objectives? And this is a past tense for Aqua, but I think it's the present tense for a lot of municipalities of how are they trying to do it, versus how were we trying to do it. And how we were trying to do it is each asset is prescribed a future life cycle spending pattern. So that's the idea of having a single asset, and we're predicting or prescribing what will happen to that asset over its life. And unfortunately, what I hope to share with you today is that there's no engineering or scientific basis for this approach. So to start with, I think it's important to remember the concept of critical thought. And so me, as a sort of self-described member of the asset management industry, how did we get here? And I think it's important really to point out that there is a Harry Frankfurt's a prof from Princeton, and he wrote a book and try to define the difference between this idea of a lie and something that's more on the concept of BS. So a lie is something we know it's false when we're saying it, but BS is a little bit different because you don't really care if it's true or false. You just want to be believed to serve your own purpose. And there's a great YouTube interview with Dr. Frankfurt. And one of the quotes in it is sort of, he's asked sort of what leads someone to have higher propensity for BS. And this is his quote about the educated class developing an arrogance that leads them to be negligent with truth and falsehood. And so I think a lot of what's happening in the asset management industry, and why we have a regulation which is mandating the use of a prescribed single asset forecast that has no scientific or engineering rationale, is a lot of people who have formed an opinion of what we need to be doing for asset management, and the lack of motivation to change what we feel is true. So let me paint more from an engineering perspective. So I started at a company called RV Anderson. Lots of great work, both engineering and asset management was happening at that company. And around the turn of the millennium here, there was a general understanding that infrastructure was noticeably deteriorating. You could start driving around cities and saying, listen, this stuff's getting worse. All the stuff we built post-World War II, it's not getting any better. And there's a problem here because we know we have no stockpile of cash to fix it. We said, we can't just replace it all with the revenues we've got, and we don't have the hunk of cash ready to replace it all. There's a problem. And so we said, what are we going to do here? Let's start seeing the problem and understanding how we address this, really start to understand. These are the sort of, you can see this ahead of the wave guide for FCM, this term sustainable asset management, and how do we create sustainable communities where the infrastructure systems can continue to provide their services over the long term. And then we get to the Public Sector Accounting Board, and the accountants, really saying, well, we'll take the lead on this. And they came up with their accounting standard, which was mimicking the private sector and the tangible capital asset and the depreciation of capital assets. And this is what you need in order to set up a tangible capital asset schedule. You need a list of assets, their purchase price. Then you can amortize the expenditures for those assets over a period of time, referred to as an amortization period. So what accountants said is, okay, we've got this asset management thing figured out. We're just going to do it like how we do it on traditional financial statements. But we need to know how long to amortize things over. And so that was really my first foray into asset management, is valuing assets and then saying, okay, well, accountants are asking us how long should something last for. So I was the engineer who knocked on, all the structural engineers' doors and said, someone's trying to ask me how long a reservoir, the reinforced concrete portion of a reservoir should last for. And I'm getting puzzled looks like, forever if we design it properly. I don't really understand the question that you're trying to ask me. And so that's sort of where we start to get some of these inklings that, I get what we're talking about in some cases, but when we're talking about things that, are designed to not fail, as engineers, we design things for them to not fail. And we're being asked how long until it fails. And that's sort of a puzzling question. So those we ended up interpreting those things saying like, well, we designed for a 100-year earthquake or X year snow load, and so those are the types of things that we're used to seeing with return periods, and said, okay, this is probably what they're sort of asking us about. So once you have the list of tangible capital assets with their amortization periods, it becomes a relatively easy, I don't like calling it analysis, we'll call it a relatively easy calculation to say, okay, if I know when I can add when I bought something plus an amortization period, I can get a future year. And if I inflate my historic costs, then I can say, okay, I can now predict the replacement of that asset in the future. And you add that all up and you say, okay, great, this is our future investment needs for our infrastructure. But again, unfortunately, there's no scientific or engineering rationale for single asset forecasts of complex civil or environmental engineered system. But this prescribed single asset forecasting, it was easy to do. We had the data in PSAP spreadsheets and we said, well, let's start doing this. And so we say, yeah, that gives you a forecast. It tells you dollars and years in the future. And we say, okay, and there was a lot of what I would say confirmation bias where it said, when you did this age-based approach, we said, and the single asset forecasting, oh, it tells us we need to spend a lot more money on infrastructure. And back to the intro comments I made, everybody knew that to be true, where you can look around and say we need to spend more money on infrastructure. So if this methodology is telling us, that this is true, that we do need to spend more, we say, well, it must be right and must be telling us the right answer and it must be the right way of doing it. So now fast forward and we're able to look at what was the problem. So those two major problems with doing these prescribed single asset forecasting, they result in incorrect spending forecasts for what's called a complex repairable system. And I'll get into that in the next couple slides, what that repairable system term means. But what we see is that future spending estimates to maintain the current asset network when we're just prescribing single asset forecasts actually overestimate needs by 200%. So when we say a pipe should last for 80 years, well, no, you need to spend a lot less than that. It should last for a lot longer than that if we're finding the things to fix and fixing them. But more importantly, the future spending to get the infrastructure we want and need aren't accounting for in these modeling parameters. So someone will say, well, the road should last for 30 years. But what if we got to add more sidewalks on it? What if, expand the sidewalks? What if we have to put in a bike lane? Well, of course, that's not in that parameter because that parameter is just how long we think it will last for. And so all these societal needs are not accounted for in the modeling parameters. So that's the problem with trying to do this prescribed single asset forecast on a very complex repairable system like a civil or engineered infrastructure system in a community. So very briefly, two types of systems, repairable and non-repairable. This contrasts to the typical thing you'll hear is that municipalities have 14 types of infrastructure systems. They've got roads, parks, facilities, water, wastewater, et cetera. But in reality, there's only two types of systems. There's non-repairable systems. These are things that, as the term describes, don't get repaired. They are fully replaced at the end of a specified lifetime, and this is typically mechanical engineered assets and is a relatively small proportion of an infrastructure portfolio. The other 95% of infrastructure is called a repairable system, and these are typically civil and environmental engineered assets, and they, all the typical asset groups that we're thinking about doing. So that's the first thing. A non-repairable, something we don't fix, we just replace it at the end of life, and a complex repairable system that's made up of a whole bunch of aggregate bits that make up that system. So a water distribution network is made up of all of the pipes and valves and hydrants that make up that system. So then how are they analyzed? Non-repairable systems, this is where we can use our estimated service life and typical full cost replacement. So we're talking about cars. There's a lot of analysis in terms of understanding how long they last for. It's really independent of location other than, where we apply salt and have accelerated corrosion on some of the steel parts. But essentially you can, a fire truck, in Toledo, Ohio is going to last for the same amount of time as a fire truck in Los Angeles, same climates and those sorts of things. And they can really do this full scale testing. And that's a non-repairable system. Repairable systems, we spend bits of money on them every so often. And we use this term average cost of treatment at the end of a certain amount of time. So there still is this concept of every so often we're spending money on the system. And then how much are we spending when we do it? So the cost of the treatment and the time between treatments. And more importantly, repairable systems are completely independent from each other and designed specifically to the constraints of a municipality. So you take boreholes and that impacts how you design, starting from there and the entire piece of infrastructure you're about to construct. And when we talk about forecasting for repairable systems, it's only possible to do at the aggregate system level. So deciding to forecast individual elements of the repairable system, that's where we fall back into the trap of trying to do it how we're doing, not like with non-repairable systems. And so what this has done is really divert our attention and resources. So we're really focused on the application of non-repairable system logic to repairable systems. And what we end up seeing is a huge effort to focus on collecting current asset condition to make our forecast better, and excessive focus on populating lots of data fields to make more what I would call unique or more specific prescribed life cycle plan. So it's not just replace at end of life, but this is a pump and it's a diaphragm pump, and it gets this sort of, first it gets a 30% rehab, then 100% replacement after X more years, which is still this urge to prescribe a life cycle spending pattern. But what it's done is we haven't put enough focus on how we forecast, and we have not put enough effort in forecasting the information we have already. So that's a big piece you see in the industry, is we got to go collect all this stuff, populating a huge system. We won't look at the existing information we've got because it's no good. We're just going to focus on collecting data and forecasting better, and we don't think about how are we trying to forecast. So for that, we have to think about, well, how do we forecast? This is more of a practical way of thinking about it. So the first thing we need to do is adopt a fundamental term of performance. And this is the ISO 55000 term, and it's not condition, it's different. Asset performance is a more broad term that refers to the ability of an asset to fulfill its objectives or requirements. So think of this as an asset that's too small, functionally obsolete. You have a car, and it's only got 4 seats, and you have a 5th person enter your family, you have a new baby, you need a bigger car. It's not fulfilling your objectives. The car could be in completely good physical condition, but it's not fit for your purpose. And so this is the idea of moving to a fundamental term of performance and not condition. And when we do that, we can have the same sort of good, fair, poor ratings we're used to seeing in the asset management world, but instead we're looking about the state of an infrastructure asset, which is focused on, does it have deficiencies? If so, what's the extent of those deficiencies? And when something reaches the poor performance category, we're talking about an asset that has had so many deficiencies, either condition or functional deficiencies, that we require spending on it for it to go from not meeting to meeting my expectations. So that's a very important concept in this approach, is to understand when we decide to spend money on something, it's because it wasn't meeting our expectation in some fashion, and therefore it is in the poor performance category and is not fit for purpose. So using these definitions, we can get the same graphs that we're used to seeing. This is the proportion of an infrastructure system in the good, fair, poor performance category. And we say, okay, great, we've now got current performance. So how do we now forecast performance? So again, same things we're used to thinking, that there is 2 competing forces. One is how quickly does an asset deteriorate? But in this perspective, it's more talking about how quickly is the performance consumed by the community. And then the second force is the improvement caused from spending. So we have these 2 competing forces of time and deterioration, a light bulb slowly getting dimmer, and then spending money to make performance go up. And so just in graphics, this is what you end up looking like. So you have spending improves asset performance. We have a chunk of the system in the poor performance category. We spend money and it enters into the good performance category. Similarly, if we don't spend money, then we have a chunk of the infrastructure system that deteriorates in a year from the fair performance category. The deficiencies get worse, and now it's reached a point where it's in the poor performance category and requires spending in order for it to be back to the good performance category. And then pretty simply, we can forecast 2 different models using this approach, where we really start looking at creating these spending to performance relationships, where we can connect. In this case, in year 4, we don't spend money, we have a bigger chunk of red, and we spend this money specifically on these components of this repairable system, and we can see the connection between the improvement in performance. So this is how we create these, tangible connections. Obviously, in the database that we've got at the Ontario Clean Water Agency, we've got 60,000 assets, so it's done at a very complex level, but it's a lot of tracking spending to assets through work orders, through capital work orders, done connected explicitly to assets. And so we focus on tracking spending against assets and then deriving the parameters for then doing our 20-year forecasts and doing our asset management planning. So the approach that I just laid out for you takes the approach of the municipality is the consumer of infrastructure. And so just to dwell on that point a bit, what you've got here is, a typical graph that you'd see in a business course on the determinants of price. So supply and demand and the determinants of consumer demand. So yes, we know that how expensive something is, but as a municipality, we have our unique needs, wants, preferences, expectations. They're all tailored explicitly to a community. And so through looking at and the application of this consumer-based asset management, it is an analysis of all your past and current existing information. So it's looking at everything that we have done and we're planning to do, and that we did know and currently know about our infrastructure systems. And that's used to derive the future performance according to all of our decision factors. So a big thing for the Ontario Clean Water Agency would be the impact of regulatory changes. So by looking at spending histories of facilities over time, we can actually understand that those decisions implicitly captured things like increasingly stringent regulations, and therefore that is a better understanding of the need to forecast future spending for increasingly stringent regulations that we expect in the next 10 to 20 years. So the analysis of what we have done and what we know right now is what's used to do our future forecast. And this is equivalent of how it's done in every other sector. So a nice one that we always like to explain is a car insurance example where they're looking at an aggregate postal code population. Within that population, they're looking at how much people have gotten in collisions for, how often and on what. They derive modeling parameters and they do their future forecasts and set your current premiums. And so that concept of they can't say specifically when I'm going to get in an accident, and even though as a row in that aggregate forecast, it might say I'm going to get a 30% claim in 12 years from now, they understand that the reliability of the forecast they're looking at is the aggregate postal code population rather than trying to get the individual element in that population accurate. They know the accuracy of trying to predict any individual person's collision history is, or to predict it in the future is basically impossible. So that's really the talk today. It's been about 20 minutes, so I think I'm right on time. Hopefully we'll get into some questions. Just to wrap up, we sort of had this concept of resetting the asset management paradigm. The four key concepts is first to understand this terminology between repairable and non-repairable systems. They are different. And that, yes, for non-repairable systems, like if we've got a fleet inventory or an IT inventory and things where we're sure these are assets that are non-repairable systems or non-repairable assets, then using the prescribed single asset forecast does work. But when we try and apply that approach for complex repairable civil or environmental engineered infrastructure systems, it doesn't work. It's more complex than that, I would say, is generally the way to think about it. It can't be that easy. We tried that. Those forecasts are relatively easy to do, but it's harder than that. And so forecasting those aggregate repairable systems is done using a consumer-based methodology where we're looking at the aggregate system and analysis of past and existing information rather than trying to prescribe single asset lifecycle models. It doesn't mean that we still don't use reliability and engineering judgments to predict what might happen to an asset where we have no information and have never seen it before. So we still do default to having to make our best professional judgment as when in the future something may need to happen, but it's the last resort, not the first resort of how we end up doing our forecast. So inevitably that may be the case. The question we always get is filter under drains. I can't see them. I've never seen them. I'm going to need to spend money, and we haven't repaired them yet. So yes, we can make our engineering estimates of when we think the major things like that will need to happen, but it's our last resort, not our first resort for how we do our forecast. And I guess the big important takeaway is that we can produce reliable forecasts with the data we have right now. So when I got to the Ontario Clean Water Agency, that was a huge, I guess, difference in perspective is with all the information we've got right now on all of our files, on all the stuff we've done to our infrastructure, all the drawings, all the annual reports, and all the data we do have, we can produce reliable forecasts with the data we have right now. No need to run around and collect a whole bunch of stuff or implement a whole new system. We've got the information and we can do it. So with that, I just acknowledge we sort of conceived of this concept following on the heels of a big project we did at Waterloo, where we didn't do this consumer-based approach. We were still doing prescriptive asset life forecasts, but following that project, we've been working together a lot with Waterloo to really figure out how we implement this new consumer-based approach, because it is much more reliable forecast, and everybody has much more confidence in what we get out of it. So acknowledgements to my co-authors, and thanks everyone for attending the virtual session. And with that, I'll take some questions.
Thank you for that presentation, Nick. It was definitely informative. As we wait for questions from the floor, I'll ask one question. In your forecasting, do you look at the difference between rehabilitation and replacement? And then how do you make that judgment? Do you allow a certain group of assets to run its life out and then replace it compared to fixing them as they need?
Right. So when we start talking about forecasts, so some assets, if we take something like a high lift pump. So if we're in a water treatment facility with 6 high lift pumps, we'll know that some of those assets may get a more substantial rehabilitation before replacement, and some might get a smaller rehabilitation before replacement. So what we will have is a distribution of what we call average treatment costs, so that each one of those pumps, if we look 6 years into the future, won't have the same modeling parameter. We sort of, if you could imagine a normal distribution where, some of the treatments go from smaller to bigger, that will have a distribution of average treatment costs for each element in the repairable system. So we, through looking at, how often we do rehabilitate or replace different asset types, they will get more unique modeling parameters for those specific asset types. So if you look at something like a clear well, it has a smaller average treatment cost more frequently for inspections and things we fix. And then for high lift pumps, you'll see a more, a range that's indicative of the rehabilitation, the average treatment of the high lift pumps.
Thank you for that. Dan, do we have any questions from our participants?
Yes, it seems though that it's a comment. It reads, "Congratulations, Nick. One of the better presentations on the subject matter I've heard in recent years. The last slide explains it all in looking asset management from a different angle."
That was the person I paid, actually, so that doesn't count.
Well, good.
No, thanks for that. I don't know who it was, but
I don't know either.
I'm a public employee now. I'm not allowed to accept presents, so no.
Oh no, with that, we do have a token of appreciation, and we are going to send you a gift certificate. So you'll just have to publicly say you're not going to accept that and see what happens anyway, right?
Excellent. I'll donate it to a charity of my choice, but absolutely.
I do want to apologize too for the mix-up with the presenter slides. We have an asset management talk going on tomorrow morning by those two other gentlemen, so I appreciate
Awesome.
your patience with that. As an aside, I would like to mention that we now have 10 members on MEA from Aqua, and so we're excited and happy to have them as members joining our group.
Well, we're happy to participate. I work with a lot of small communities across the province on helping them with their asset management planning, and that's really this non-repairable system approach. When you're in a small community and you're dealing with something like a water main, this is where you really get to it, because someone will have an 80-year service life and 2 kilometers of pipe that service a small trailer park, and they're saying this makes no sense. How do I possibly manage this infrastructure asset? And then we apply this principle, and it really resonates with the smaller communities because they see it, in a smaller system. It's more evident that the single asset forecasts don't work.
Yeah,
Man,
I agree.
I agree. Question in. We do. One just came in. Sorry to interrupt.
Perfect. That's great.
But since we have a bit of time, we'll take the question from Evan Cassidy again, who asked a question earlier this morning. Do you have any recommendations, Nick, for asset management software that municipalities can use to record and track assets, including potential replacement costs?
Yeah, so the one thing I would say about asset management software is that to be more explicit, or the industry needs to be more explicit with what it is that we're trying to get out of that software. So in the Ontario Clean Water Agency, we use a tool called Maximo. It's for work management tracking, essentially. So we have all of our assets and we're assigning preventative maintenance plans, and then we can go out or if something fails, we can track a reactive work order. So that's the tool that we have. What we've also done is procured, a tool that's what we call asset investment planning. So it's really the forecasting tool. So we export data from Maximo, and then we put it into this tool where all it's trying to do, all we want it to do is not replicate Maximo tasks, but do our investment forecasting. And so that tool is called Infrelect. It's out of a nonprofit from the University of Waterloo, and it's the best asset investment planning tool that we use. It doesn't, if you don't have a system like Maximo or a big system to track all of your assets, you see a lot of the asset management software applications that are trying to, Citywide as an example would have a work management add-on or module plus an asset investment planning module. So I would say first figure out what part of asset management software you want help or you think you're looking at, and then on the investment planning, like I said, the Infrelect software application that we use is the only one that we know of that operationalizes this performance-based approach in the forecasting, and so that's the tool that we're using at Aqua.
I don't see any other questions, Amanda. Sorry for cutting in again. I think
All right.
And
All
I'd be happy to have a follow-up. Whoever asked that question, I forget the gentleman's name, sorry, but I've implemented a lot of asset management software applications over my career, all the off-the-shelf ones. So if you want to connect one-on-one, shoot me a note and we can get into some more details.
That's greatly appreciated, Nick. Thank you very much, and thank you again for your presentation.
Awesome. Well, thanks. Good hosting the virtual event, and hopefully in person next year, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Bye, everyone. Enjoy
Take
the
care.
rest of your day. See you.
So thank you very much to all of our presenters. They were great presentations. And again, I want to thank our sponsors and ADS specifically as today's platinum sponsor. Please go over to the exhibitors and take a look at the trade booths, have a meeting with them and ask any of the questions you may have. This concludes our morning session. At 1 p.m., we do have the game of Kahoot and some networking opportunities again before we start back up at 1:30 for our second round of presentations. Please be back on time, and we will get going right at 1:30. As you can see this morning, we're quite well on time and even early on some of our presentations, so we'll try to keep that pattern going. And everybody enjoy your lunch, and we'll see you afterwards. Take care.